Good afternoon, eMERGE Americas. How is it treating you? Treating you very well. Excellent. I'm glad to hear that. So this is my favorite event of the year in terms of what goes on in South Florida, and I'm really excited about what we're going to talk about here on our panel because there's so much stuff that's happening, and we're in this age of acceleration and mega disruption, and we truly live in a world that's unpredictable. Events, crises happening all the time, and organizations really need to be proactive, reactive, flexible, and adaptable to the constantly changing world in which we live and work. There's much discussion about technological singularity. It's been a topic of discussion here at eMERGE here this morning on various panels where we have a hypothetical future where technology and the growth related technology is going out of control and irreversible. Intelligent and powerful technologies will radically and unpredictably transform our reality. So today's business and industry sectors, including the public and private sectors, really truly face a risk in our landscape at disrupted levels that few have actually seen before, and none has ever confronted as an executive. We have reached a defining leadership moment where executives are taking a step back and redefining resilience. Now is the time to seize the momentum to build resilience for a future of sustainable growth. Risk and resilience was a major discussion point at the World Economic Forum annual meeting in Davos last May, where climate, food, supply chains, technology, organization, education, and healthcare are the leading challenges to address with solutions if life on Earth is to grow and prosper sustainably. Today's panel is focused on risk and resilience priorities, and it's somewhat scripted, but somewhat not. We're gonna bounce back and forth like a fireside chat, if you will, and we'll see where we go over the next 30 minutes. And I'd truly like to welcome our panelists. We did a great job already introducing everybody, but we have Eduardo, who's the Chief Cybersecurity Officer at Trend Micro, and I'm going with first names. We're on a first name basis here. Jalak, who's the Managing Partner at Future Perfect Ventures, and then Sidney, who's the Chief Risk Officer at Binance.us. All right, so got some fans out there. All right, so I'm gonna go with question one, and instead of asking everybody the same question and same old boring panels, we're gonna ask each of you individual questions, and feel free to comment on the answers if you wish, and if you could also, maybe if you want, do a little overview of who you are and what you do as you lead into the first question. But Jalak, we're gonna go with you first. How has the definition of risk and compliance evolved in the business landscape over the years, and what are the key priorities for organizations in 23 and beyond?
Sure, and I'll start with a little introduction on what we do. Future Perfect Ventures is an early stage fund focused at the intersection of AI, blockchain, crypto, IoT. And with it's a fund I started in 2014 around the thesis that we were having a proliferation of data from all of our devices, smartphones, smart TVs, and that we were going to have to figure out a better way to organize that data, to analyze that data, which is where the AI and machine learning come in, and then be able to transact that data, which is where the blockchain and crypto come in. And since I started that fund 10 years ago, we've seen certainly, from a data perspective and a risk perspective, things just increase, manyfold. And so when I think about risk, and I advise portfolio companies, but I also look at where our portfolio companies can play a role in mitigating a lot of the risk. I mean, we have the traditional cyber risk, we have environmental risk, we have human risk, right? Human error risk. And what we're seeing more and more of is this financial risk, and crypto plays a role if we start to think about central bank digital currencies, and how we're starting to see kind of regional alliances start to emerge and transact with each other. So there's a lot of these risks that go over into just the geopolitical sphere that I think about 20, 30 years ago, it was a much more kind of simple landscape. Now, Eduardo may, I know with your background, you may disagree with that. It was simpler back then. But we've certainly seen, more and more need for software, solutions that can stay ahead. And assess the risk and act in real time as soon as we see some of these exploits.
So you mentioned the word data and when we were starting off, and I was just on another panel this morning. What was interesting, there's 40 quintessential pieces of data in the world, which is more than the number of stars that you can see in the sky. I just thought that was an impressive piece of statistics. So thank you for that. So we'll move over to you, Eduardo. What are some of the best practices for developing a robust risk management strategy that enables organizations to respond to unpredictable events, crises, and circumstances quickly and effectively?
Yeah, so let me start a little bit about what we do at Trend Micro. We're a cybersecurity solutions provider. But the one thing I can tell you that we've been around over 30 years, we've always focused on the security aspect, and we still do. But I think as we all in our industry, we've had to mature and understand what we need to do, not only protect our customers, how we can take it to that next level and inform and better for organizations to mitigate risk. And so, because from my perspective, it's cyber risk, and it is that cross-cutting risk across for every sector. And as I was saying, it's gotten really complex, and obviously the higher the complexity, the higher the risk across the board. But when it comes to the sort of the tempo and impact of cyber attacks, I've obviously from ransomware attacks, from an operational risk, I would say that's probably one of the game-changing threats that we face that has really impacted risk at a different level. And so when I think about what are the key considerations that organizations need to do to sort of build their risk program to address cyber, is like, first and foremost, one of the things is understanding your regulatory and compliance landscape. So we were just talking back in the room that now we're facing them regardless of sector, be it government and or financial, healthcare, and now critical infrastructure. It's only going to increase. The regulatory burden for organizations is only going to increase. And so the challenge there is, how do we better create a more of a continuous monitoring and assessment of risk for organizations as they go through the challenges that they face on a daily basis. Because it's not just the regulatory requirements that you're going to have to face, but it's also the risk associated with the regulatory requirements that don't exist. It's the uncertainty, right? Risk management is uncertainty management, right? And so for us, it's how do we, help infuse and help companies and organizations deal with it. I would say second is risk assessment and prioritization, right? So what we do and what we look at it from the perspective is not just, can we help you manage risk? And so the security analogy is, that has challenged IT and CISOs before, is this sort of volumetric approach to cybersecurity. How many millions of hits that you blocked? Well, that doesn't really tell you the story why. It doesn't tell organizations why they should focus on prioritizing, say, patching that vulnerability. So it's all about continual risk assessment, but also to help inform prioritization of resources to combat that risk. And I'd say the last thing is obviously incident response. How can we improve incident response to mitigate and reduce that residual risk that occurs, and be able to speed up the detection, but speeding up the response and the recovery piece. Incredibly important. And that goes to not just the actual security aspects to it in a security operations center, but it's also focused on what strategy do you have to create that cybersecurity risk management policy and approach. In other words, you have the right policies ahead of time? So in other words, do you have your playbooks when you do get attacked, so that it's not something new and unseen to you, that you actually can do a little bit of a muscle memory? So it's exercises, testing your playbooks to be able to respond quickly. So that's pretty much what I think is, from a cyber risk perspective.
I want to talk to you a lot more about cybersecurity because if you ask C-suites what's the one thing that keeps you up at night, I usually get two answers. It's cybersecurity and access to qualified, skilled talent. And I think the cybersecurity one's an interesting one, probably for a whole other panel about proactive being reactive, and I'm always curious why we're reactive and not so proactive in a lot of environments, and of course that ties in with our subject here today. So Sidney, I got a two-part question for you, and of course feel free to provide an overview of who you are and what you do, but how important is it for organizational culture in building a compliance-first mindset? And then the second part of the question is, what role does leadership play in fostering an organizational culture of risk awareness?
Good questions. First of all, my name is Sidney Majalya. I'm the Chief Risk Officer at Binance US. So I have a very quiet job, nothing to see here. The question of organizational culture and its importance in building a culture of compliance is foundational. It is the most important thing in building a culture of compliance is organizational culture. Because I have had the opportunity to work at 3 iconic American companies. I've worked in compliance roles at Oracle, I've worked at Uber, and I've worked at Intel, and now I'm at Binance US. Of all of those companies, Binance US is by far the most highly regulated company that I've worked at. And unlike what you might hear in the press about regulations, we are a highly regulated company. We operate in 46 states. And in most of those states, we operate under what are called money transmission licenses. And so we have a separate regulatory scheme that we have to follow in 40 plus states. And that is above and beyond what we have to do from an AML and BSA perspective, right? And so if you are going to be successful as a financial services company in the United States, you have to be compliant. Mm-hmm. And so our company was founded on the idea that we were going to be compliant with US law 100%. And so that means federal law, it means state laws. And so from the very first conversation I ever had with my CEO, Brian Schroeder, we talked about compliance and the importance of it and how it was going to be central to the success of the company. And that had to start from the top. And so the fact that we were having that discussion, like from the inception of our relationship, meant that Brian understood that compliance was going to be extraordinarily important to the company and to its success ultimately. And so we preach a philosophy of the importance of compliance coming from the top, messaging from the top regularly on compliance and its importance, and that every person in the organization is responsible for compliance. And so if I'm talking to a candidate, obviously in my role, that person is going to have understanding and awareness of compliance. But if I'm talking, or if our director of product is talking to somebody who he's bringing in his organization, he's got to talk about the product, and he's got to talk about compliance because our products have to be compliant. If it's somebody in finance, they have to talk about it. Somebody in customer service, they have to talk about it. And so we believe that compliance is important in every aspect of our business, and so from a cultural perspective, it is the most important thing.
So I'm also, maybe, I don't know if we'll have time to embed it in today's panel, given the short time that we have, but culture and climate are 2 different things, and I'm always interested in how culture dictates climate, and I don't know if there's a way to embed that at some point along our discussion here. So we're going to start making our way back down the line. I'm going to come back to you, Eduardo. If we look at this era of increased regulatory scrutiny that we're in right now and the changing compliance requirements that seem to change all the time, what are the key considerations for organizations in prioritizing the risks and resilience in their operations? Well,
one, it's a great question, but I think going back to what I had said earlier, to sort of expand on that, I mean, the whole goal is obviously to manage risk, and in cybersecurity and cyber risk, it's getting to that automation level because of the fact that I think historically, and probably not a one-for-one for other types of risk, right? So I think when cyber risk was being sort of approached and being managed, it's this very manual process. It's a paper exercise. You're asking questions of the CISO and the teams. You're gathering evidence or artifacts associated to show that you're actually in compliance. And so this whole notion is that, we actually see it, right? All of us, if you have car insurance, if you have Progressive, if you have Geico, whatever the case may be, everybody's got a dongle now for their cars, right? So what do? You plug it in, and then somebody's watching. So that's good for my son. And so I think that's what we need to do. And then obviously, all of us, right, when we talk about a culture thing, just to tag on to that sort of topic too as well, is I think everybody understands risk. I think we all become sort of risk experts, so to speak, right? The pandemic, and then if you live here locally, last week and a half we haven't had gas. And so you really understand the connected issues associated with risk and the impact of this cascading impact of risk, that if you don't address it here, it's going to affect you down the road or somewhere else. And so I think from an organizational perspective, the key considerations and or focus, we need to have this approach. You need to have, one, create and or adopt. I wouldn't say create, more adopt a risk management framework that obviously is commensurate to your sector, right? So obviously I'm former CISO from the Secret Service, and we had to utilize a risk management framework. But as you can tell, and I was talking in the back room, is that type of risk sort of compliance and regulatory burden is now shifting, not just from government. We just saw the National Cybersecurity Strategy from the White House, and focusing and understanding that critical infrastructure is facing more scrutiny and more responsibility. So that means additional possible regulatory burden, but they do address it in there. They want to streamline it. That's, well, good luck with that coming back from the government. But I think the challenge is, identifying a framework, doing your due diligence and adopting that framework, and going back to the continuous monitoring piece. I really think that, sometimes we overthink it, but if you do the basics and leverage technology wherever you can on the automation, machine learning, AI, which is a great topic I'm sure here all day and yesterday. So I think these are the opportunities, not just challenges, but great opportunities, especially on the technology side.
I was chuckling inside when you talked about the insurance companies and the little plug-in thing, so I just downloaded from my insurance company, USAA, the mobile apps. You don't have to plug it in anymore because it's supposed to reduce my policy. I just got a notification the other day because I'm coming up for renewal. I think my policy is actually going up because apparently I'm an abrasive breaker. So I like to drive fast and stop short, but so I'm going to be taking that off my phone. So so
what data you give up, right? Which is the whole key of privacy and the blockchain.
So Jalak, I'm going to go on to you. Two-part question. How do organizations balance the need for innovation and growth with risk and compliance management? And then the second part, what strategies can be implemented to effectively manage risk while driving organizational growth?
Yeah, well, with the first one, because we invest in companies that are pre-seed and seed, sometimes further along at the Series A, but very early stage companies. And having been investing in the crypto sector and the fintech sector now for over 20 years, these are a highly regulated, at least fintech, crypto's getting more and more regulated areas, and so when you have a company raising $2 to $3 million, and just setting up compliance systems can take up that whole amount. You often see companies that are highly regulated have to raise more money simply because these compliance systems, compliance officers are expensive, as they should be if they're doing their job well. So, but what we're also very interested in seeing is that automation piece, and so investing very actively in software, a lot of it, on the AI and machine learning side that can help on the compliance. And so whereas a lot may have just been done with spreadsheets or enterprise software systems that need to be constantly updated, you're ingesting real-time data, being able to analyze it and create real-time dashboards. Now, from looking at your example, right? I mean, that doesn't mean that the outcome is necessarily taking into account probably every single model that should, and that's where these models keep getting refined. But we think we're getting further and further there, where more and more automation is possible, and that real-time monitoring is absolutely key, because you have milliseconds to catch exploits, and catching it after the fact is people have already lost hundreds of millions of dollars if you're dealing with money. So we always encourage companies, even if you have to upfront raise more capital, you're also you're creating a moat, because that means that other companies are going to have to do the same. Yep. And over the last year, we've certainly seen the importance of compliance, and US, the two areas we focus most on, blockchain, crypto, and AI, are in the midst of having all these hearings around, what's the regulation going to look like, and particularly in the US, but also on a global scale. And so it's important for us to protect innovation, make sure the legislators understand the positive elements of this technology, because it doesn't help to have intermediaries and human error in a lot of this. That the technology can really be beneficial to everybody, and it's not just a negative, but so it has to be legislated in a smart way, and so we get very involved. We've been getting very involved in that process.
So can we just ask ChatGPT to solve all of our problems?
Oh gosh, yeah. I don't want to live in that world, because
All right, Sidney, I'd like to ask you about technology and data analytics, and how they can be leveraged to enhance risk management and resilience efforts. And then a second part of that question is, what kind of emerging technologies are shaping the landscape of risk and compliance management in organizations?
Yeah, so I think it's, again, in our business, we run a 24/7, 365-day-a-year exchange, right? And so I think similar to the response to the last question, you have to have the right people in place to monitor that business every day of the year, every hour of the day, the entire year, right? And so you have to have the right people, and then you absolutely have to have the right technology. And so when you say you look for companies that are investing in the technology that can appropriately monitor whatever it is you're doing in the world, it's extraordinarily important. But it doesn't mean that you don't have to invest in people. And so I've been at Binance US now for about a year, 3 months. We have totally overhauled our compliance teams, our risk teams, and we've brought in people who have expertise from other areas of finance because they have the experience to look at a situation and adapt it to this new, the new thing that we're looking at, right? In terms of digital assets, and so. It's extraordinarily important, again, to have the right people, and those people then have to evaluate that technology, right? We are looking at vendors every day who can help us automate and ensure that we're able to look at the reams of data that we get on a daily basis, right? Like transactions are happening all the time. We have to be able to look at those transactions, make sense of them, and you can't do that as a person, right? So you got to have software products, right? That ingest that data, produce alerts that are. You could have technology that's producing lots of alerts, but those alerts have to be. You have to fine tune that product so that the alerts are actually actionable, and so that's what we're doing every day. And so again, you need the people on the one hand, you need the technology, then you need the people on the back end, right, to ingest and look at all of that.
So I'm glad that you talked about people, because I'm always surprised that people are your number one asset.
Yes.
And on the balance sheets, it's people that are the first to go, we're not invested into, and I can never figure that out. We haven't solved that problem yet, but you bring up a very good point. So in the last 3 minutes and 45 seconds that we got, we're going to enter what I call the lightning round. In the lightning round, in 30 seconds or less, what is the one thing that this audience must take away with them today that hasn't been said? And one of the challenges of being on a panel is you never get to talk about what you really want to talk about. So here's your 30-second opportunity. So Jalak, how about we start with you?
Wow. Okay, I feel like I've said a lot.
No pressure.
I think there's just a lot of talk about Chat GPT, and I think it goes to what you just said, that humans are still the human brain is still the most complex, impressive technology out there, and that we need to collectively, make sure that we're continuing to use these tools that are out there, but that we are capable, and that I don't see the bots taking over the world anytime soon.
So this must be a great panel. This has never happened to me before, but the clock just bought us a minute and 15
you said that.
So this is great.
Clock just So I think, one, to borrow the workforce development piece. I mean, I think as users, as consumers, we, as I said earlier, are understanding risk more and more, right? And so we have to be better consumers when we're looking at things that we are either purchasing, participating in, because the way is the threat landscape is unfolding is speed. And unfortunately, what's out of that formula, the one thing that doesn't really exponentially grow is the human element to respond to speed, right? So the speed of attacks increase, so we have to maybe leave. So the risk of
You're on
fire alarm.
Another unprecedented.
Exactly. So I think maybe people are getting up, but essentially, I'll let Sidney finish it off. But ultimately, you as users, consumers, understand the risk is a much more important thing for your organizations, but you personally and for your families. So it's a stakeholder problem that we need to really focus in on, and an education problem too as well. Going back to workforce development, another panel.
So you're on fire because you just set the alarms off. But I think it's safe to assume that the panel can continue. We're not being hauled off stage, so I think it was probably an accident. Sidney, you're 30 to 60 seconds.
I think I've got 3 minutes.
I got
So
something
I
too.
actually have there are two things. So I think as folks are thinking about putting together compliance and risk organizations in their companies, there are three things. A couple of them we've already talked about, but there are three things that kind of the lens that I bring to the process of building these programs. And the first one we've talked about, people. Mm-hmm. You got to start with people. If you don't have the right people in place, you're not going to get anything done. And that starts from the first person you hire to start your compliance program or your risk program. The second thing is process. What are your processes, right? Do you have the right processes today? Is the person you hire going to be able to build the right processes? And the third thing we've talked about also, again, is technology, right? What technology are you going to bring into your organization that is going to help you scale? Because again, there is so much data. Things move so quickly, you absolutely have to have the technology. And so when I bring in people to lead my organizations, I tell them the same thing. I want you to focus on the people, the process, and the technology in your organization, and in that order, by the way. Yep. And that's how we're going to build. And so that's how, that's the kind of direction I give, and that's how we go and build. The second thing is, for all of you out there who have businesses that want to do business with other businesses, which is basically every business, you have to think about compliance and risk because your business partners are going to ask you about it. I am in conversations every day with our business partners about our compliance and our risk and the processes that we use to ensure that we are in line with what they do and that we are not presenting risk to them. So if you don't care about compliance, fine, your partners are going to, and they're going to ask you about it.
Okay, well, I appreciate that. So in the final minute or so that we got, I think it's safe to conclude that and assume that the resilience building must be accomplished jointly and in a coordinated effort by public and private sectors. Coordination must extend across all the resilience areas, and unfortunately, many of the resilience areas are interconnected, but we don't know this until there's an apparent crisis upon us, and that to be proactive, we must be aware of interconnections and related vulnerabilities to ensure that efforts in one resilience area are aligned with the goals in the others and accelerate progress towards them. So I have a number of things in terms of key takeaways that I'd love to discuss. We're short on time here, but I do want to thank Sidney, Eduardo, and Jalak for your insight, and this is really just dusting the surface in terms of a much bigger discussion that we have to. So applause to you and everything that you're doing. Greatly appreciate it in your time today. And also to our audience, owe yourself an applause as well. Thank you for coming and staying through the alarm, and I hope you enjoy the rest of Emerge Americas. And this concludes today's panel. Enjoy the event. Thank you. Someone's got some cheerleaders out there.